You're sitting in a circle at night, firelight moving across everyone's faces. Someone just told a joke, and the whole camp is laughing so hard someone's crying. Nobody here has a job to wake up for tomorrow. Nobody here has a phone. And somehow, this moment looks a lot more fun than most of yours. Today we're traveling through every era of human history, from the Stone Age to the modern world, to see how people entertained themselves long before Netflix, football, video games, or even books. We picture ancient life as nothing but survival, hunting, starving, freezing, running from something with teeth. That's mostly wrong. Every era of human history, all the way back before we had a word for history, carved out time for something that had nothing to do with staying alive. Let's talk about it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the Stone Age. It takes up over 99% of all known human history, and we know almost nothing about it because nobody was writing anything down. Everything we know comes from physical clues, sealed in dirt and stone, dug up by archaeologists who have to guess at the rest. And one of the strangest, most consistent clues is art. Deep inside caves, far past where daylight reaches, researchers have found paintings of bison, deer, horses, woolly mammoths, made with charcoal, clay, and mineral pigment. Some were finger-painted directly onto the rock. Some were made with brushes fashioned from animal hair. In some cases, people blew pigment through a hollow bone, a kind of prehistoric airbrush to spray an outline onto the wall. The oldest confirmed examples date back roughly 32,000 years, though that's almost certainly not when the practice started. It's just the oldest one we've managed to find so far. Here's where it gets interesting. Scholars have pointed out something odd about where these paintings show up. Not near cave entrances where the light is. Deep inside, in total darkness, places you'd need a torch and real effort just to reach. That detail has led many researchers to believe these weren't idle doodles. They were deliberate, possibly ritual, possibly spiritual, possibly just an early form of storytelling. Nobody knows for certain. But whoever crawled that far into the dark to paint an animal on a wall wasn't doing it to survive the night. They were doing it because they wanted to. And it wasn't only art. The anthropologist James Soosman, who has spent years studying groups like the Ju-Hwanzi of southern Africa, found that within some of these communities, roughly 6 hours a day were spent simply being together, talking, joking, teaching, doing nothing that resembled work. That's not incidental. In a small group where your survival depended entirely on your standing with everyone around you, spending hours a day maintaining those bonds wasn't leisure on the side. It was some of the most important work a person could do, even though it looked like nothing at all. Now here's where it gets interesting. Move forward to the Bronze Age, and something changes. Humans start settling down, farming, domesticating animals, and for the first time, writing things down, which means, for the first time, we don't have to guess. One of the clearest windows into Bronze Age fun comes from ancient Egypt, around 3100 BC, in the form of a board game called Senet. Archaeologists have found boards ranging from simple portable sets to lavish table-sized versions owned by royalty, all built around the same layout. 3 rows of 10 squares, 30 in total. Players moved pieces using thrown sticks, flat on one side, rounded on the other, functioning as a kind of ancient dice. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Senet, though. It wasn't just a way to pass the time. The board itself represented the underworld. The pieces represented the soul. Certain squares carried real symbolic weight. Landing on square 26, the House of Rebirth, offered protection. Landing on square 27, the House of Waters, sent your piece backward, essentially drowned. Reaching square 30 meant your soul reached the gods and achieved eternal life. A simple board game, played by ordinary people for fun, was simultaneously a rehearsal of their entire belief system about death. Around the same period, in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians began keeping written records on clay tablets, mostly for practical purposes: administration, trade, contracts. But among the surviving fragments are things that look suspiciously like leisure, personal notes, observations, the kind of thing you'd only write down if you had time that wasn't accounted for by survival. Here's the wild part, though. Skip ahead to the Iron Age, to ancient Greece, and fun becomes something closer to spectacle. In 776 BC, the first Olympic Games began, held in honor of Zeus, open only to free men, built around foot races, wrestling, and a version of combat sport with essentially no rules. Biting, eye gouging, and death were all part of it. This wasn't a side activity. It was one of the most culturally significant events an entire civilization could hold. And there was a quieter kind of fun happening too. Formal gatherings called symposia, originally meant for philosophical discussion, regularly devolved into structured drinking contests. Groups of men competing to drink the most wine without passing out or getting sick, sometimes with fatal results. Anthropologists studying these events believe they functioned as informal tests of masculinity and endurance. Most of them just ended in humiliation instead. That's not a coincidence. Across every era so far, the pattern repeats. Fun wasn't separate from meaning. It was wrapped inside religion, status, identity, community, sometimes all at once. Move into Rome, and something else shows up for what may be the first time in recorded history, a formal concept of work-life balance. The Romans had two distinct words, negotium for work, odium for leisure, and the boundary between them was taken seriously. When it was time to work, you worked. When it was time for odium, you were expected to do nothing strenuous at all. The Colosseum, opened in 80 AD, hosted roughly 100 events a year, nearly one every 3 days, giving ordinary Romans a genuine, structured cultural calendar of entertainment. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the medieval era. For all its brutality, it produced one of history's most theatrical forms of organized fun. Jousting. Two armored knights on horseback, charging each other with wooden lances. The entire goal being to knock your opponent off his horse in front of a crowd. It drew spectators from every level of medieval society, nobles and peasants standing shoulder to shoulder, and it remained popular for centuries even after gunpowder made the underlying combat skills obsolete, because by then it wasn't really about combat anymore. It was about honor, spectacle, and drama performed live. And then things get honestly a little stranger. In Victorian England, a genuine wave of public entertainment formed around unwrapping Egyptian mummies, first in scientific settings, later at ticketed private parties, driven less by science and more by pure morbid curiosity. Around the same time in America and parts of Europe, early fascination with electricity produced something researchers now call electrotherapy parties, friends gathering to shock each other with static electricity for amusement, half science experiment, half party trick. Victorian England also saw a strange trend of headless portrait photography, an early photo manipulation technique making it look like a person was casually holding their own severed head, essentially a 19th century filter. That's the real pattern nobody expects. Fun never stopped evolving, but it also never really left. Cave paintings become gallery art. Sonnet becomes chess and checkers and every board game since. The Colosseum becomes the modern arena. Jousting becomes contact sport as spectacle. The impulse driving a person 12,000 years ago to crawl into total darkness and paint a bison on a wall is the same impulse driving someone tonight to lose 3 hours to a video game or a show. Every single era found time for something that didn't need to exist, something that produced nothing, fed no one, built nothing you could hold on to the next morning. And every single era did it anyway because somewhere very deep in what makes us human, surviving the day was never quite enough. You're still sitting in that circle. The fire is still moving across everyone's faces. Somewhere behind you, deep in the dark of a cave none of you will ever see. Someone from 10,000 years earlier already finished the same thought you're having right now. And somehow, none of it ever really stopped.